You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network, hanging out with two 95 Network teammates today. Been looking forward to recording this podcast for several weeks. I got Mary Ann Sibley and Joseph Bennett with us today, and we're going to talk all things volunteers because Joseph recently had Mary Ann come and lead their volunteers at the church he's working at. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, how are you guys doing?
Oh, how are we doing, Joseph?
We are great. Yes. Hanging with our peeps, Marianne. We're great. How are you?
With our peeps.
Yeah, those who, if you're listening, you may want to go watch this one on YouTube because it's got illustrations
it's
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. So, Mary Ann, you have been doing volunteer training ministry, the whole thing, and we've done multiple podcasts about it. And today we're going to focus on that some more. And then Joseph, you've obviously been on the podcast several times. We had you on the start of the year. But your church recently brought in Mary Ann to help with the volunteers and things like that. And you and I had breakfast together a few weeks ago, and we've had a couple of calls. And every time it comes up, you just get so pumped about what you saw and what you experienced. So that's ultimately we want to go with the podcast today, just kind of talk about some of that and how what Mary Ann does could be a real asset to many other churches. But before we do all that, for those who may be new to the podcast, and don't even realize that 95 Network, we have a team of people. We've got people that are part of 95 Network that just represent very specific things that they bring to the table. And Mary Ann, you have your own area. We even got you on the coaching page and what you do. Take a few moments and tell everybody your story and then how you got to doing what you're doing now. And then Joseph, I'll come to you with the same setup.
So my story really just starts that I didn't grow up in church. I was raised Buddhist. And for fun these days, I call myself, back when I was a heathen Buddhist, and but no longer. But not growing up in the church and not being invited to church until I was 40. And I grew up in the South, so that's kind of surprising to people because it's heavily churched down here in the South, in North Carolina specifically. And the story of God in my life and how He brought me to Him, to Himself, primarily through people who left me where I was. And my whole experience coming to church for the first time, thinking it was a cult, as a single mom and two young boys. My boys at that point were like elementary and middle school boys. And to think back of my intimidation of what it felt like to come to church and not really understand what church is really about, or having some preconceived ideas and even some, I would say, ugly ideas. Like I was very much the person with the wall, looking for a reason to leave and not stay at church, like looking for the reason. And so, but God did what only He could do. And after a couple of years, I was asked to come on staff. At that point, the church was running maybe a couple hundred people, maybe, including kids and everybody. And we were meeting, and we joke about it. We were meeting basically in a fire trap of a building. I mean, it was a hot mess. But it's really cool from my perspective to see what God did in that environment. Like, it's not about the pretty things and the big fancy churches and all, because when people knew me later, when I started working for the church, it was a small church, but I was able to be a part of that church as God grew it to where when I left in 2014 to go do my own thing, we were running close to 10,000 people across 4 different campuses. And the volunteer ministry that I was leading had over 1,000 volunteers just in the hospitality guest services area. And so, I mean, who'd thunk, I always say, like, there is no way that was on my horizon. I was going to be a banker forever. I then left and was the chief financial officer of a multinational computer company. So I was like deep into corporate America, and God did a whole 180, and here I am in ministry. And so it is very like up here in my face, so real, so close, like it's yesterday, what it feels like to come to church. And even these days, having known Jesus for over 20 years, looking for churches and coming to churches and still experiencing that you're not welcomed here. It doesn't feel like you're that you care. I don't see the words that are from the pulpit saying we're glad you're here and we're all about displaying Jesus to you, and I don't see it lived out on the church campus. So whether as a heathen Buddhist or a person who's known and loved Jesus for over 20 years, it's the same. It's the same message, and I'm a big believer that our volunteers in the church, as I always say, the volunteers are not there just to further your mission. The volunteers are the mission. And so I was able to see God work and do ministry in the volunteers that were serving while they were serving. And it became more just another discipleship opportunity with the people that are raising their hands to say, I'm going to come and hold a baby, hold a door, walk people to a seat, serve coffee. And God's like, and this is a ministry to the people doing it. And so that's really my focus. It's more than just creating a map of where people should stand. It's more about a ministry of discipleship forward to your volunteers.
You've just never forgotten what it was like for you when you first came to church. That's
never.
It keeps driving you. This is 20 something years later, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good springboard point. But before we get to that, Joseph, you and I have been together for a long time. You were a missionary in Honduras for a while with your family, and I actually came there and we served together there. You are gifted in the arena of leadership, and it's just something that's kind of natural to you. Take a few moments and kind of tell everybody the Cliff Notes story of your life and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so man, thank you guys for having me on this afternoon. It's an honor to be on this podcast with both of you. I love you both very much. So man, I started in ministry when I was, I guess, 18 years old. So crazy, didn't really know what I was doing or anything.
But you do now.
I'm still trying to figure that out. So that's why we call people like Mary Ann. So it's great. But so mostly in student ministry for a while and working with students and really enjoying pouring into the next generation. And then God called our family overseas to Honduras, and we planted a church there just to reach the people that weren't being reached in our community there. And that was really awesome to see what God did. And then I ended up becoming our national director. So we had around 150 churches there, and I helped coach and oversee those pastors and other ministries in the organization. And then just over 3 years ago, God called us back here to the U.S., and I'm serving in our church here. I helped launch a campus as part of our church, and now I serve as our executive pastor here. So helping kind of direct and guide and oversee our staff and strategy for ministry and all that stuff. It's a lot of fun. So
that was good. That was definitely the Cliff Notes of it all. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, because you've known Mary Ann for a while, because we don't get to do it every year, but we try to pull our team together as often as we can, at least once a year to meet, plan, pray, and basically just get direction for what we feel God has for us for the new year. Why did you reach out to Mary Ann as far as coming to the church that you're still serving as the campus pastor as of this recording, but you're also the executive pastor, and this is a larger church. But why did you feel the need to reach out to Mary Ann?
Well, for one, guys, I think it's like the heartbeat of even what we do at 95 Network is that we talk about this all the time with pastors, with leaders in ministry, is that what is our role in the church in this Ephesians 4, that we're to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So who are the saints? they're the volunteers. Those are the people that show up on Sunday. They put their hand up and say, "Hey, I might like to do that," or I could hold a door. I could hold a baby. I could, run the slides on Sunday for the projection, for the lyrics, for the worship songs. I could do that, or I'd love to see what that looks like. So they are, as Marianne, I love that you say that they are the mission. The only way the mission gets accomplished is through the people. Our greatest resource in the church is the people that God has brought us. Not, of course we need dollars to make our ministries function and do certain things, but our greatest resource is the people. So one of the reasons why we reached out to Marianne was, I think we can all, as the Big C Church, improve in how we equip those volunteers, how we encourage those volunteers, and how we empower them to go out and serve. And it's not because we want them to understand. We don't just want something from you. We want something for you. As Marianne said, it's a discipleship moment. So bringing Marianne in was a part of that for our volunteers, of like, how do we do this better? How do we encourage them, equip them, and empower them?
Well, I've been in the church for a long time. I've been in ministry for 40 plus years. And the mentality, I would say, for so many churches that I have been associated with, is that the people are there to fulfill my mission or to fulfill my vision. And honestly, that's just not biblical. In fact, I don't even like calling them volunteers, because the reality is it's the body of Christ. And Ephesians talks about it. Corinthians talks about it, that, if you're missing a part, then you're not going to be complete. You're not going to be impactful. The reality is our job as leaders is to equip and to train and release people to do what they do. Marianne, as you have worked through this, what is it you see that is maybe could be the big disconnect of why more churches aren't empowering their people?
I think a couple things come to mind. One of the big things I see is churches are just doing too many things. And so they're so busy, no one has margin. They can't catch a breath to just kind of, check out the landscape. How is everyone doing? How am I doing, as a church leader? And so everyone is just running to the next thing. And on top of that, we also have the Sundays are coming every Sunday. So I remember being on staff and how the pressure of that, as soon as Sunday was over, man, you hit the ground running and it's getting ready for Sunday again. And so you're on this hamster wheel, and then you add all the events. And so I think what happens, this is just human nature. We get into the task and what needs to get done. And before we know it, we just naturally can forget, unless you have someone dedicated whose job and whose heart and whose responsibility and accountability is for the care of the volunteers. And so I think too much is a lot. And I know even as our church was growing, clearly it was ridiculous. And I believed my role on staff was to be the fighter, the voice for the volunteers to our senior leadership. And because all my volunteers, they were at home, they were moms, they were working in full-time jobs. So I'm sitting there in the church office, and here comes another event. And I actually had to say no to my pastor. He walks in and he's like, "Hey, got this thing, Marianne, really love to get your people." And I said, "Well, let's talk about the event." And then I said, "Sounds like a great event. It's not that it was bad." I think that's the hard part. It's not that there's bad things happening. It's just too many.
Yeah.
And I said, "So I love the event. When?" And it was coming in line with a lot of others. And I was like, I'm going to say no to that. Which, back even then, everyone was like,
You can't say no.
And I'm like, yeah, you don't say no, lead pastor. But I didn't see it that way. I was saying yes in healthcare for my volunteers. I said, I will not go back to the well and burn them out, because I have promised them. I mean, I stood on stage with a beach umbrella as a model to tell them, trust me, I will not burn you out. This is a giant umbrella of safety and shade, and we're creating a healthy rhythm of serving so that you will have rest. And so now, if I'm going to them every week saying,
Yep.
come on, then they're looking at me like, we can't believe anything she says. So the credibility issue, it was more important for me to be the voice for the volunteers than take whatever I would take by telling the pastor no. So I think that's one of the things. And then also it's about like ownership of care for the volunteers. A lot of times, um, and I know not every church can do it, but you can get volunteers to do this, where their responsibility is not just being a manager of volunteers and sending out a spreadsheet or a planning center, but like really figuring out the different ways that we can care for our volunteers and making sure they're serving where they should be
Mm-hmm.
serving. It's not that everything's perfect, and so there's a lot of wiggle room in there, and that they're doing it in a way that honors their family, first of all, right? Their family, honoring God, their family, and the ministry. And so I really became, golly, crazy lady. They were calling me if I got ninja as part of my ninja because they never knew when I was going to show up and go, what's going on? But really caring for them, like everyone's doing so many other things. So yeah.
Well, that really speaks to, we focus at 95 Network on the small and mid-sized church, and we do a thing, and Joseph actually does these as well. We do a thing called Vision Day. And one of the things that I do with the Vision Day is when we're working with an individual church. And one of the things I always tell them is most small churches specifically are known for doing 20 things poorly instead of one or two things well because they try to do too much because they feel like they've got to provide the same everything that the church down the street with 3,000 people provides, and they can't. They don't have the people, resources. And so, the 80-20 rule is definitely a big deal in a small church because, you've got 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. And there's this battle for, quote unquote, the best volunteers to serve in every area. Now, that's the norm in the small church. Joseph, you're at a larger church, so you guys don't have any problems getting volunteers, correct?
The truth is, you should never say you have all the volunteers you ever need because you're always going to need more, or you should be creating more opportunities for people to serve. I
Okay.
think that's awesome. And I think that was what I was going to say. I love one of the reasons why we even brought Marianne in was, it's just I think it's great that your church needs to have a mission and vision. We talk about this a lot in
Mm-hmm.
95 Network. So it's important knowing what that is. But are the people like in a mission, we say a mission and a vision, it's not just you being able to say whatever your mission and vision statements are.
Mm-hmm.
It's that you're living that out, and it's also flowing from the staff to the volunteers and then out into your community, right? That's how the gospel gets spread through your church. So by bringing you in, Marianne, was so awesome because you helped remind our volunteers of the why behind the what, the where, and the how. Like, what are they going to be doing? Where are they going to be standing? How are they going to be doing it? That's important. But the most important is why are they doing it? It's the message of the gospel. We want the message that the church holds, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We want that to go out, and by serving, we play a role in that.
Joseph,
Yeah.
you've been in ministry a long time, as have I. My question for you is, why is there such a disconnect here between staff and volunteers with understanding what both of you have been saying? There's just, this is not a new problem. That's why we're doing this podcast, and we've done multiple podcasts about it, and we'll continue to. Why is there this? What in your mind? What's that? Why is there a disconnect between empowering people to do ministry, especially in churches that have paid staff?
Yeah, I talk about with our staff all the time. I'm like, guys, when we don't give away the ministry, we don't empower our volunteers, we don't equip them, we're robbing them of something that could bring them joy in our lives, and shame on us from taking that away from them. I'm sharing a message on Sunday about the parable of the sower. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is the sower, when he goes out to spread the seed, he enjoys it, is what it talks about in 2 Timothy 2. He enjoys the first fruits, but you know what? He doesn't just enjoy it for himself. A good farmer takes it and shares the harvest with others. So I think sometimes it's like it's the fear of, well, can I let this go? Is somebody going to do it as well as I can? So there's that control side of it. And then other times, I just think it's, we're not properly trained ourselves. And there's, an aspect of that that I think could play a role into that.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? It's not being properly trained ourselves when it comes to volunteers.
Well, I think that, we're not reaching out to people like Marianne to say, hey, what am I missing? I think that's one of the greatest things that we can do is have someone else take a look at, what does this look like? What does it feel like? When we communicate this way, when we send our volunteers out to do things, have we been clear? That's one thing I was going to say, Marianne, I love that you do. When Marianne did our training with our volunteers, she was telling us we were going through, we had like some SOPs, here's some standard operating procedures of how they're going to fulfill their roles.
SOPs, right? Just want to make sure
SOPs,
I get good. All right, good. Yeah. This is a Christian broadcast.
That's right. So we were talking through those things, but like Marianne would we'd run it through the filter of her, and Marianne, you would talk about, is this simple? Is it clear? Like, can they understand what all this means? You're not just using so much insider language, or your job description for whatever position is not 10 pages long, because who can do that? So all of those things, are helping those volunteers be empowered to do what they do.
Yeah. I would add, no, I appreciate that. And first of all, what a joy to be at your church. And I'm not just saying this. I even put something on Instagram. One of your volunteers came up to me because I was there all day Saturday with your team. And then I came back on Sunday, and wasn't anything secret about it. But actually, I kind of like that because they know me and we can engage in conversation on the spot. And I can ask them questions and they can ask me questions. So that was so much fun. But one of your volunteers, we were having a good time out in the parking lot. So I was pulling him out and we were reviewing some things, and he stops me and he says, and he says, can I change this conversation for a minute? And I was like, sure, whatever. And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out this cross, this little wooden cross. And he said, yesterday after your session, your story about your son was so impactful. I went home and I carved this. And he's an older man. He's tearing up. Of course, I'm always crying. And he's like, and I made this for your son and I prayed over it. And I want you to have it. And I just stood there, and he and I are in the parking lot crying and hugging each other. People walking by and we're like, hello, good morning. But I mean, the heart of your people, it's one of the things that I always learn when I go work with churches is getting to meet face to face the people that are out there in the trenches, so to speak, and their heart is amazing. And your church has that in faith. But so you think, well, where's the disconnect? And it's like everything, we forget our first love. Like, we're about do this thing. And it just takes that reminder of, oh, okay, remember why, to your point. And so it's not that big a leap, really, when you have people that are leaning in and asking questions, and volunteers and staff. But I have encountered where there was a disconnect. In fact, right now I'm working with a pretty large church in another state, and we developed this plan, and we were going to launch it actually for Easter. And it's not, I was having all the angst because I was taking everything so personally. I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong? And why can't I get this through? And so finally I just called it, and I spoke to the pastor. I said, I'm going to have to cut it. We're not doing it. We got to go to plan B. And so I said, here's what I suggest. And I was thinking I was going to get, the axe for sure. And he was like, oh, no, I 100% agree. because he said, we knew before we even met you that things were not good with our volunteer situation. He said, but you just now revealed that we're like hemorrhaging, worse than we thought. And I said, okay. Whew. So I'm like, well, let's go to plan B. So the willingness to say, yeah, let's go to plan B. Let's work on this other. So, there's always that hope. Like, even if it looks like, wow, this is a hot mess, the people in our churches, the heartbeat of Christ with the volunteers that's the engine. That's the thing, equipping the saints, right? That our communities across this globe need desperately.
We're going to take a short break, and we come back. I'm going to talk to Ninja here for a minute because I know something I'm going to talk about that's going to bring the ninja out, Joseph. So get ready for this, okay? So short break. Well, we'll be right back. Back here with Marianne and Joseph talking all things volunteers, and I just set up before the break. I was going to reach into and touch the ninja here a little bit. So Marianne, I know we live in the same area, so I know you and Dean and your daughter Michelle. She'll like that if she hears that on there. But here's what I want to dive into a little bit. And Joseph, I want you'll be able to come around on this one as well. I know that you guys have for a while been looking for a church just for your family to attend. Gene and I kind of went through that same process as well, and we found one. And you may have found one since, but it's been frustrating for you. It's been a real frustrating. Why?
Oh my goodness. I want to be in church.
Yes.
I need to be in church. Mm-hmm. And so together, and my husband Dean, like we're on the same page. Like, not only just to be in the presence of other worshipers and just be in the presence and hearing messages, but we also want to serve in our church. I need to give back. And so it's been crazy hard because we have tried some churches in the area more than once or twice. Like, we get sometimes you have a bad Sunday. Mm-hmm. And several things. It's been, what's the word? Horrible to non-existent guest services. Mm-hmm. Like, really non-existent. Like, we went to one really large church in the area and went to a couple of their campuses. And we went to one of their smaller campuses. I'm like, let's go to the smaller campus. Cool. And I always have my journals. I don't always take the paper they're handing out, so I walk in and I smile. I'm kind about it. I said, no, thank you, and I walk in. Well, Michelle, my bestie, she's behind me, and we sit down, and she said, you did hear what the greeter said? I said, no, what happened? And she said, well, you didn't take her paper. And she went, kidding me. Like, just was so offended.
And you're a first-time guest.
Yeah, I'm a first-time guest. Now, I didn't see it, but I have friends that were like me before I met Jesus. Mm-hmm. And if they were behind me and saw that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
That breaks my heart.
Well,
so that's not an isolated situation.
Yeah, you ran into multiple churches where you'd go to and no one would speak to you. And this is not large churches per se. This is all size churches.
Yeah. We're in the parking lot. We're in the parking lot waiting for people. Like, hello. And I mean, it's like we're begging. I even yelled at one guy, is this the door we go in? He goes, I think. I don't.
Well, I mean, I could do secret shopper story. I've done secret shopper at churches all over the country. I did one in California where I actually was trying to break in cars while the security team watched me, but they were all in a group talking about the baseball game the night before, and I'm over pulling on doorknobs and or door handles trying to open cars, and they just looked at me like, "What's wrong with that guy?" So I get that, and the reason I brought that up is because I want folks to get past the idea. I think sometimes there's a disconnect, especially in our smaller churches, with understanding the value of leadership. It's not just like corporate training people. The impact of the church is a reflection of your leadership, Pastor. The impact of
Yeah.
it's a reflection of your heart for people. And when people show up and they can't find which door to use, or I've heard this many times where it's like, there's no signage, and so you don't even know where the restroom is. Joseph, you and I ran into that in Honduras, where this one guy, he just about went to the bathroom on himself because there was no signage to find where to go to the restroom. Joseph,
Yeah.
what do you think about when you hear things like this, as far as, because I know your passion for leadership, but this is beyond just leadership. It's getting the heart of Jesus, which is what you guys have said all day, to touch
Yeah,
people.
yeah. And I think about what you just said, Marianne. I mean, it's like, I always think about that the sermon starts in the parking lot. And I don't mean somebody's standing out on the street corner with a bullhorn and a sign yelling
I
and
wouldn't go in
preaching.
if they did.
Exactly. That'd be the church
I'm
I'm
gone.
not going to.
I'm
Right.
gone.
But yeah, so but it's, be able to answer those people's questions before they walk in. Yeah, I always think through the thought of, there's a single mom walking in with 3 kids in tow by herself, and she's just like barely even made it there, but she finally got up enough courage to go. And then there's no clear signage, there's no one giving her direction. Why would she want to come back if that causes more stress in her life?
Yeah. And 100%, because that was me, a single mom, right? Coming to church for the
And
first
you
time.
didn't want to like it, by the way. You said it in the
I
past.
didn't.
Yeah, you didn't want to like it.
No. But here's what I would add to that. Even someone who's been to your church 100 times, there is just something about taking the mindset of people who are looking at church as, this is what I do on Sunday and I'm checking the box. And this whole idea of, when we think about, God delighting us with his creation, he doesn't have to. When we think about sunsets and just all the beauty, like the things that he does for us in our lives that make us go, wow, you are God, whether it's in our world or in our circumstances. And so as ambassadors and image bearers of Christ, we get to be that in person, so that for a person that has been to church for years, are thinking they're driving in, checking the box, it's Sunday morning, and there are volunteers excited and ready and smiling and welcoming, and they're kind of like, what? And it does something inside of us, because it's not us smiling and all that's doing the work. The Lord, like I'm that crazy person. I actually believe the God that parted the Red Sea is the same God today that will take a smile in the parking lot and make someone feel like, wait a minute, and maybe soften that heart to prepare them to sit and hear the message that the pastor's been working on for 2 weeks, right? Like we get to, in Isaiah, clear the plains, clear the way so that the glory of the Lord can be seen. And so it's for the newcomer, but it's for everybody. And we want everyone to go, wow, this is just not church. This is like church. Like this is hope. This is joy in the midst of pain. This is someone that is feeling pain, and you'll hear their story later and go, man, they smiled at me all the time and I had no idea that they had lost their job. What's up with that? Why, how can you have joy? And so then we get to have these conversations. So, one of my newest pet peeves, well, it's not newest, but it's something that really irks me. I'm just going to say it on our podcast, Dale, is hands-free serving. There's something about, like, have you ever gone to a restaurant and the hostess was sitting there drinking a glass of wine or a cup of coffee? No. When you pulled into, your favorite amusement park or any great location or just a restaurant, or downtown where we live, they have valet parking. Are the guys out there holding their drinks and coffee? No. Hands-free says, and I just always think of the image of Christ in his arms wide open, and all through scripture that he, with his right hand, he takes hold of us. Like it says, hey, I'm available. So if you need me to pick up that baby carriage or pick up that trash, I don't have to juggle anything. I am ready to serve. I am here for you. It's intentional. It's on purpose. It's with great joy. And so when we did pull into a church this past week, there were so many coffee drinkers. It looked like they were on break. So I wasn't really 100% sure they were volunteers. It was hard to see. They had a tiny little name badge. Didn't mean anything to me. I can't see it anyway. And someone else said, yeah, I think they're volunteers. And I'm like, well, they don't act like it. They're not looking at me. And I walked by three of them, and so now they feel like they're on break because they're all drinking their coffee and they're having a conversation. And we walk by and nothing. So
yeah, I've said for a long time, so many of our churches, and I'm coming to you, Joseph. So many of our churches they say they're the friendliest church in America, and they are. They're friendly with themselves. But churches hit this point usually when they hit about 100 people to where they just get inward focused and they don't have a Mary Ann or a Joseph to come and say, "Hey guys, we got to be thinking about how we're coming across to these other folks." And so they are friendly. They're friendly with each other. That is a part of church. I'm not saying it's not important, but they don't include new people. Joseph, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things I thought about, Mary Ann, you said, and again, I love, Mary Ann, how simple you make it when training volunteers. You said something that was so simple, but so profound. Like she was talking about the greeters standing at the door. And it's kind of the same idea you're talking about the coffee drinkers, right? We're all holding coffee. It looks like you're on break. But she said, rather than be serving nose to nose, if there's two greeters at the door, nose to nose, so you picture they're talking, rather than being nose to nose, you need to serve shoulder to shoulder. It's posturing your body even in a position of towards the people saying, I'm ready to receive you. I'm here to serve you. And when you said that, I was like, that's so good. Because if we're nose to nose, we're just in our own little conversation back and forth across to each other. And when someone comes in, it's like, oh, hi, we've looked over our shoulder and they're a second thought, not the first thought.
Well, the reality is this: volunteering and serving in any capacity, it comes from the top down. Like the new church that Aunt Jean and I have joined, you can you feel the DNA of the pastor and the staff. Their heart, their passion for people. It's permeating everywhere. And so, Joseph, let me ask you this question: Is training volunteers or equipping volunteers? Do you consider that discipleship?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think number one, it's biblical. So, you're equipping those saints, you're teaching them, you're helping them understand the why behind this is why we serve coffee. This is why we say hello in this manner. This is why we, guide people to children's areas. It's all a part of that. It's all discipleship. It's all helping them understand the purpose of the Great Commission to go and make disciples, to teach them, to baptize them. You're playing a role in that.
Mary Ann, when you see a healthy church that's got a really good volunteer base, and even if it needs training, because we're always, no matter what level we're at, if we go to the next level, there's change that has to happen. What excites you about seeing that whole healthy system happening?
Well, I see so much inclusion of all people. And what I mean by that is it's not inclusion like the holy huddle, but what I witness and what I sense is that people are serving expectantly. Like I'm expecting to include you, the stranger. I meet the stranger along the road, and it turned out to be Jesus. Who'd have thunk? But it's this whole expectancy of I'm expecting for God to use me today. I'm expecting to see Him move, whether with me or someone. And at the end of the day, I may not know today, but it doesn't matter. So there's this intangible expectancy of service that I get. And I didn't really appreciate it until what I'm doing now in some churches. But when I was on staff, I remember we did a huge event outside of our church, but it was held at our church. And the guy in charge came to me and he said, oh, I hear you're the person I need to talk to. And I thought I was going to get in trouble again. And he said, are you in charge of all these volunteers? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, what's going on here? I said, there's a sense of the Holy Spirit and the Lord here. There's something else, like they're smiling, but it goes beyond that. And man, that's it, right? That is it. And it's like helping our volunteers not feel like they're going to make a mistake, so they're frozen and they don't do anything. Or they're not permitted or allowed to because they're just a volunteer. And so part of empowering and making a healthy volunteer team is reminding every time they show up that this is your church too. This is ownership. And how would you want your why, your person that is so far from God that if they walked in and there's 10 minutes left to church, you would fall on your face and thank God. Like, how would you want them to be received today? Like, you would be on the edge of your seat and you would be waiting in the parking lot for them. And, you know, you would make sure everything is clean. And so it's that constant reminder to be expected to see God do something in people around you and in you. That changes everything.
Yep. Joseph, you had Mary Ann in. She trained your volunteers. What's been different since she was there?
Oh man, I think that it was kind of like, the statement of shot in the arm or wind in our sails, because, one of the reasons why we brought her in at this time of year is that Easter's coming up in a few weeks. So, are we prepared? Because it's that spirit of, just like you said, Marianne, we want them to have that attitude and the mindset and heart for expectation. Man, when we get here, God is going to do something today. I know he's going to send somebody that's never been here before. I know he's going to bring somebody in who's never heard the gospel. Today, somebody's given their life to Jesus. Today, somebody's, addiction is going to be broken. Somebody's marriage is going to be restored. Something is going to happen today. And I think that, we're seeing that. I mean, last week, volunteers were showing up so excited to serve, even just coming off of the weekend we had with you, Marianne. And it's like, man, that's what we want. It's like they're pumped and they're expectant for God to do something even greater than we could ever ask, think, or imagine.
That's so good. Marianne, a small church pastor's listening right now, and he's going, I don't have a Joseph. I don't have a large staff. How can you help them prioritize having a healthy, and again, if you have a church of 100 and you have 25 or 30 very committed volunteers that have been trained, that could be life changing. What would you say to them to help them today?
Well, I would say this is about discipling and letting go to put in your state. So I would say, look at your 25 volunteers you have and really look out this is what I did to start out. I looked out and I said, man, I found 3 people that I could bring in and start brainstorming with them to offload, to think how we could make it better. Because when I started with this, y'all remember, I didn't grow up in church. Like, I knew nothing about how church did things. And so I went to the volunteers, and that created this culture where they knew they had a voice. They didn't have a say in all the final decisions. That was on me, but they knew they had a voice and I would listen. So I'd say, go to those few people. And it can't just be the person that just happens to always show up. Like, I think that's a default. It may be that person, but you want to know someone, I always say, who's coachable and approachable. And the person that's like Jesus, right? Who's really approachable, who is someone that people, it doesn't have to be the pastor or a child can go to them, but who's coachable, who leans in and goes, oh, that's a good idea. I never thought of that. And ask them what is good right now about serving in this church and what's hard. I mean, that's where I started. And let me tell you, they tell you. Yeah. They tell you. And then if you can get those people to say, okay, what parts can we own and work through it? And if you want to get on a call with me and with those 2 or 3 people, I'm happy to do that and brainstorm.
Oh, I recommend that already. I'm going to get Joseph to give you a big recommendation in a minute.
Do that right now.
So, Paul told Timothy, one of the things I want to make sure I speak to before we wrap this up today, and you were heading this way with that, Marianne. Paul told Timothy, the things you've seen in me, I want you to commit to faithful people who are able. We value faithfulness in the church, but we don't always value ability. And so sometimes just because someone shows up every week, they're not necessarily the person you need to hand off leadership to. They've got to have the ability to lead and develop people. So make sure that, and again, start doing 1 or 2 things well instead of trying to do 20 things poorly. It will help. It'll help bring cohesiveness and just an amazing amount of unity to your church. Joseph, as we get to the end of the podcast, there's some pastors right now that need help with their volunteers. Tell them why they need to hire Mary Ann.
Guys, look, you can't afford not to, okay? Because she's going to help you. Even as you said, Mary Ann will take and boil whatever size and capacity that you are, or whatever your structure looks like. And I really believe Mary Ann has a gift with helping people with their volunteers. She can boil things down to a very simple level. It's very clear, and help you walk away with a plan and help you implement it. And you will be encouraged as a leader, as a pastor, and your team, your people that you serve with, they will be encouraged as well.
Well, I totally endorse her. Obviously, she's all over our website. But I'll tell you right now, the main reason why, and which I've alluded to this earlier, is Mary Ann's never forgotten what it was like to not know Jesus.
That's right.
And that drives what she does. It drives, and I was thinking about this as you were talking a few minutes ago, where I actually met Michelle, your friend who introduced us. We met because we were serving in a toddler's class together. We were attending a very large church, and I remember one Sunday I was, if I'm not traveling, I was attending church, and as I'm walking into church, out walks this young couple. They've got a child they're carrying and another child that's walking, and both the children are crying. And the reason they're crying is because they were turned away at the church because the room was so full that they'd reached capacity for leaders. And I remember the Holy Spirit speaking to me going, you know what? They're probably not going to preach anything in there today you haven't heard before. Why don't you sign up and start serving in that toddler class? And I did. And I mean, a lot of times all I do is sit on the floor and they piled all over me. But we've got to, as leaders, put into the hearts of our people a reminder of why they do what they do. And it's not just about filling in people to cover things. It's about helping people find Jesus. Mary Ann, so some pastors like now, he's like, I just don't know what to do. What would you tell them needs to be their next step?
Email me.
Okay.
Yeah, just email me because then we can just brainstorm what the next step. But if you don't want to do that, I would just say the very next step is really consider what's on your plate and take a real hard look. And if it's anything to do with volunteers, then you need to start looking at who can you offload this to. Because I think, the church I mentioned before that we're redoing it, it's all on one of the main pastors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you can't do this. And he agrees. And the volunteers are telling me, see, what y'all don't know is when I get into churches and I get to talk one-on-one with volunteers, they tell me things.
You get the other perspective.
and so a lot of what I'm telling you is from my own personal experience when I serve with leading volunteers and when I'm at churches right now, they're telling me, and they're missing out on the intentional care, communication, clarity, all those things is missing. So someone else needs to own it.
Joseph, speak to the leader that he's like you and me, who has a hard time handing things off because everybody won't do it the way it's supposed to be done. You're a campus pastor and you've been that, and now you're executive pastor and a campus pastor. And I know you have to deal with this. How do you deal with it?
Yeah. Well, number one, what I would tell whatever pastor is listening is you can't continue doing it all on your own. You're going to put yourself in a ditch. And Dale wrote a book all about being stalled. You need to read that, Pastor. That's one encouragement I would give you. But realize that, man, by giving it away and then watching those people serve in their purpose, you will be rewarded. You'll be encouraged. Your heart will be filled with joy, Pastor. So, are they going to do it as good as you are? Maybe not. Okay. But, their 80% might be better than you think you're giving your 100%, but you got 1,000 plates spinning. So you're not giving 100% either, Pastor. So give that away. I'm telling you, just give it away.
When I was pastoring,
it'll be It'll be better.
When I was pastoring the small church I pastored, wouldn't let anybody straighten the chairs. I know this sounds so crazy, but I had people who would want to do that, and I just never let anybody do it because I had to have them perfect. And I actually had a couple come up to me and say, "Listen, if you will let us, we would love to straighten up the building afterwards. We'll straighten the chairs for you." And I mean, they pulled a string on them, and so after 3 weeks of doing that, they came to me and they quit. They said because they knew I was going behind them and restraining them. And I just said, okay, I repent. I can't do this anymore because I'm spending hours of time on things that don't matter and missing out on having the time to focus on what does matter. And I was very convicted by that. Marianne, so you got your coffee with somebody today, and they're like, I just don't even know where to start. And I know we need to email you, but beyond that, if you're talking to a leader today, and they're like, I want to learn how to empower people, what would you think the first step should be?
Well, if you read your Bible and you go back to what Jethro told Moses, this thing you're doing is not good. It's all scripture. He lays it out. He says, and to your point, you give it away. And so I'd say, let's sit and talk about where are the areas that you can give away in terms of volunteers, right? So I mean, I'm not creating anything new. I mean, there isn't anything new. And I try really hard to make sure it's like, well, what does the Bible say about this? Mm-hmm. And the Bible's very, very clear. And as he told Moses, you need to assign people, you need to give it away. You can't do it. And then, when his hands got tired, other people were lifting it up. These are the pastors. They feel like they have to do it. And even though I wasn't a senior pastor, the only way I could have 1,000 volunteers in the ministry is I also had to learn to build a leadership team of volunteers that I completely gave away. And it was hard. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of pride and it was a lot of fun, but I knew that I was going to end up in a ditch as well. And I did end up with pink eye and shingles at the same time. So that was the hard lesson God used in my life. Mm-mm. But that's the way our volunteer teams grew, is because I had an intentional leadership team of volunteers, and I let go and I disappeared. And then I just saw what God did with that. It was so cool.
Our job is to work ourselves out of a job anyway. Joseph, would you add anything to what she said if you were talking to that same person?
Yeah, I thought about how, Pastor, you have a great benefit that most people in a vocation do not have the benefit of. If you are a surgeon that's going to do a pretty detailed surgery, you don't have the benefit of, well, I'll go get 10 volunteers that could do this for me. Mm-hmm. You have to do it. But in ministry, you're partly paid to give away.
You're totally paid to do it if you want to go Ephesians 4.
Absolutely.
You're just your job.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome. Like I told our staff here, is like, guys, we're telling you, give parts of your job away. And that's okay. And if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job well. It sounds so backwards, but it's like, that's what we're called to do.
Well, I hope today has encouraged some folks. I hope today's inspired some folks. We obviously could talk for hours just because we're friends, but I just wanted today to kind of just remind people there's help available, and you're not going to fix it all in 1 or 2 minutes or a few weeks, but you got to, if you're on the wrong road, you got to get on the right road to solve that problem. And here's a couple of folks who can tell you firsthand that it works. So Marianne and Joseph, thank you so much for taking time to hang out with me today. I love you both and appreciate what you do. And it's great to see God's call upon your life.
Thank you, Dale. Good to see you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. Thank you, Marianne. We appreciate y'all.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.